I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Matt Luter.
I'm Matt Booker, and when I came to after the conference, I was flat on my back on the beach in the freezing sand, and it was raining out of a low sky, and the tide was way out.
Oh, shit, son. Nice. Uh,
Excellent.
that,
That's not actually true, but it's
yeah,
metaphorical.
yeah, yeah, of course. Nicely presented there, Matt Booker.
I mean, who's to say what's true? But
Well, welcome to episode 39, everybody. This is a special conference review episode. The 2018 David Foster Wallace Conference just wrapped recently in Normal, Bloomington, Illinois. I was not there, of course, and so I'm just going to spend this episode listening and complaining about all the fun I missed out on. But we have a special guest, Matt Luter, making a feature appearance again. You guys are all familiar with Matt Luter, great friend of the show and has been on several times before. Matt, welcome. Thanks for joining us, buddy. It's good to have you.
Glad to be here, y'all.
more than a friend of the pod, I would say a honorary member of the pod.
Yeah, getting there, hey?
Aw.
Three episodes there, Luter.
Oh, shucks.
And Matt
That
is
gave you a
also
record.
one of the. He's a member of the special club, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we can edit this out, but I think that Matt has attended every David Foster Wallace conference in Illinois State.
I have, and Danielle Ely also has.
Danielle,
We were
that's
talking
right.
about this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I was joking that we need to get, if not T-shirts, something like the old Saturday Night Live bit about the five-timer jacket.
Yes, the five-timer club.
Yeah, we could make something like that happen, maybe.
It's a smoking jacket, right? It's
I
like a
I
smoking
think it
jacket.
is. Yeah, yeah.
Well, next year you'll be part of the six-timer club, so that's really special. And if there's anyone else out there we're forgetting that has been there every year, I mean, I know there's several people who have been to a lot of these, but I don't know everyone, obviously. So, like, if
You
someone
don't?
else has been to well, believe it or not, if someone else has been to everyone, like, write in and let us know so we can add them to the smoking jacket club.
At the very least, we should get buttons made or something, or stickers. I
Hell
don't
yeah.
know.
Hell yeah. A ribbon, maybe a ribbon. Baldric. Do you know what a baldric is?
No, what's that? Cudgel, maybe?
You get a baldric. No, a baldric is like one of those like banners that goes across your chest, like,
Oh,
but you
like a
wear
sash?
under a suit. Well, it's like a sash, but you wear a suit coat over it.
Okay.
Oh,
Maybe we'll get Matt. Doesn't wear a suit coat that often that I've seen, but maybe we get a baldric. So I wanted Matt to be on the show today because we didn't have full coverage at this conference. Dave, I did not show up until like dinner on Thursday, so I missed like the whole first round of panels, and Matt went to a bunch of other stuff that I didn't go to, and so I felt like we needed at least one other person on the show to talk about the conference, since
Yeah, because I'm
you were
useless.
not there.
I'm useless here.
Well, in this case, you're not 100% useless, but it's gonna be difficult for you to talk about a conference that you didn't attend. Although I have often talked about books that I did not read.
Oh,
So
well, there you go. I'll fake my way through it. Fake it till you make it. Although I did see some of Samantha Wallace's presentation on the Facebook Live and Mike Miley's as well. So I got a
Well, that
slight
counts.
glimpse. I got a slight glimpse.
now that counts. I think, and that's one of the good things about this conference was that they did try to broadcast every panel, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciated that.
Let me just back up a little bit and say, like, I think that this conference has become the sort of centerpiece of David Foster Wallace studies,
Yeah.
and that we have had other conferences around the world in which a lot of prominent academics have attended, but for my money, there's only one that is like this. And especially spread across, 3 days, and having all of these panels and all of these people there, now 5 years, there's just really nothing else like it. And, there's part of it that's the conference, and then there's the other part of it that is the kind of social aspect of seeing a lot of the same people, where it really does feel like summer camp or family reunion. I mean, Matt, Dave, what both of you, like, give me your like overall impression of like what's the like place of the conference?
Oh gosh, I would agree that it is sort of centerpiece is a good word, Matt. I think of it as where we can sort of in a few days just get a sense of what a lot of people who are thinking deeply about Wallace are thinking. I think you made the comment that you could tell sort of 3 or 4 years ago that a lot of what was on people's minds within this community was, what do we do with fandom, and what do we do with sort of bringing together academics and non-academics who are interested in Wallace. And this year and last, there's been a lot of discussion of gender, of representation, of thinking about Wallace in the light of the Me Too movement and the questions that it raises. So, I think you can sort of in a few days' time get a sense of trends in what.
Yeah, it's like the pulse of the Wallace community, I guess, in a way.
Sure.
And we're going to talk a lot more about that, like in terms of what everyone was talking about this year at the conference. I think that that's an important thing to try to document. And I think there were some really interesting things that came up in that regard. So more to come on that. I mean, Dave, can you just give us like your kind of perspective of what it feels like to be there and not to be there and watch on live stream? And
So for me at this point in my life, going to the conference is way more about the social, friendship, fun aspect of the people I've met there over the years and just getting to hang out than it is about the content. And obviously the content is important to me, and I care about it. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have spent 40 episodes talking about this stuff. But truly, like, when I had the realization last year in downtown Bloomington that I wouldn't be coming next year on the last day of the conference, I was just gutted about the fun that I was going to miss out on with you guys hanging out, and being at the Drink Tank Airbnb house, as it's come to be called. So when I first started going to these conferences back in 2014, it was all about the content for me. I was a master's student at the time. I was sort of really just starting early work on my thesis, and it was like, okay, I'm just going to go learn a whole bunch of stuff, and hopefully I can apply it to my research and to my work. But now, 4 years later, my reasons for going back are in some ways quite different. So having to miss it this year was definitely a bummer. But I appreciate the frequent updates via text, especially from you, Matt Luter. Thanks for that. Following on Twitter was great. The Facebook Live stuff was awesome too. But I will say it was a pretty dark weekend for me last weekend, because in addition to knowing that I was missing out on the conference, my favorite game, Netrunner,
I was going to bring this up, but
it was announced that the company that makes it can no longer support it due to licensing issues with the previous company who owns the rights. So they announced like the death of Netrunner. No more future products, tournaments, anything like that. So I've been pretty unhinged in the last week. So it was like my two favorite communities in one weekend. I was sort of grieving the loss of them in a way. So that's tough, that was my thinking about it.
That's really tough. And one other note I would say about kind of an overall sense of the conference is that there was, several people who were not there this year, including Charlie Harris, who was on the podcast last year during the conference. We had the live episode with Jim Plath and Charlie Harris, and I don't know if we've mentioned this on the show, but Charlie passed away
at the end of October, beginning
of November last year. And this year's conference was sort of dedicated to him, and there was like a little memorial thing for him, and it was great to see Victoria Harris there. But that was another sort of, pretty significant change for me and for a lot of other people too, who looked forward to spending some time with Charlie Harris at the conference. But I want to run through like some of the panel stuff, because I did go to as many as I could and write down some notes, and I kind of want to go chronologically if we can, and talk about some of the work, and then sort of come back to some of the more general, what people were talking about in the hallway type stuff.
The scoops.
And the
we're
scoop,
really,
right?
I'm here for the scoops, you guys.
The gossip. Right? We're going to have a separate gossip
Two scoops,
podcast.
preferably.
And actually, Matt Luter is a good place to start, because I believe he had the first panel of the conference was his on
nice.
Thursday.
Get it over with.
Like right at lunchtime. Him and Matt Prout. And Matt, I believe that was his first conference, right, for Wallace. He's a PhD student at Bristol University in the UK. So he maybe he attended that Bristol conference a couple of years ago on Wallace, but this is the first time I had met him, and he was a really fantastic guy, and I'm really sad that I missed Matt's paper on octet, and then Matt Prout's paper. I mean, can you give us a sense of what Matt Prout's was out, and then tell us also a little bit about your paper, Matt?
Sure. I would say
that's 3 Matts to keep track of, by the way.
Yeah, we've got a lot of Matts.
Here's the first scoop. Matt Booker, why were you so late on day one? What held you up? Your flight complications?
No. I booked my travel like 5 months ago, and I had this memory that the conference would be like it didn't start at the right time. I think that I thought it would go all day Friday, all day Saturday, and it ended up going like half day Thursday, all day Friday, half day Saturday.
Oh, I see.
And so I think I just had a mistake, like a mistaken idea of when the conference would actually be held.
You got rused. You self-rused.
I got rused, and another thing different. Well, whatever. All right, sorry to have this interjection, Matt. If you want to go back to talking about your panel.
Well, that coughing fit's over. So I would say the other kind of trend that I heard a lot of, other than gender representation, Me Too things, was the post-critical. And I say that because it was the subject of the panel that Matt Prout and I were on, and then also Grace Chipperfield's paper, which I really liked a lot. I would put in this category too. So this is, and I'm really interested in this stuff. The idea that coming out of Rita Felsky, Eve Sedgwick, a few other people's work, the idea that the default mode in criticism for so long has been sort of has been critique. The idea of looking to what a text fails to do, or looking at how it interacts with much bigger systems of power, of other sorts of cultural influence and discourse. And so what I was getting at just with octet was, first off, I'll mention I was really freaked out by, I've always been sort of intimidated by octet. And so I kind of said, well, let's just go for it. Let's just commit to trying this out, the post-critical take on octet. And so I, with some trepidation, did this whole thing of, what interests me about that story is how for the first half of it, which very few people talk about, most people talk about the last pop quiz of the story, when the story kind of turns in on itself and starts falling apart. Mm-hmm. But for the whole first half of it, there are these weird moments where the narrator doesn't seem to know everything about what he has created. There's a lot of weird maybes and some weird moments of ambiguity. And so I was getting at what this reminds me of, far more than the author as authority figure, far more as the author as someone trying to interact with great sincerity, is he sounds kind of like a teacher who's highlighting ambiguity and then encouraging people to deal with that and think about it through posing those little questions at the end of the pop quizzes. And so that's what I was getting at, was the idea of reading Octet where maybe the narrator is not so much a writer or a reader, but something more like a teacher. And then that's what I was getting at there. Matt Prout's paper I liked a lot. It was working with a good bit more theory, and particularly more narratological theory than I was. But he was also focusing on brief interviews and the idea of characters trying to read each other within that book almost as if they were texts, and how that sort of creates a lot of the self-consciousness and the difficulty with interaction that Wallace is interested in. So, that's my attempt to summarize what was a really good, but I think more complex paper than mine.
Well, and his title is something about like the hermeneutics of suspicion.
Yes.
And I think to like really do him justice, we would have to have him on separately just to dive into it, because it seems like pretty deep. But your paper about the kind of narrator as teacher, I thought was also super interesting concept, because there was a lot of other stuff going on about pedagogy and teaching at the conference. And, it's especially hard to avoid when you're sitting in a room that David Foster Wallace taught a class in, like you're at Illinois State in a classroom, in the English department, and like being very aware of being like a student and then having someone like listen to a paper and you're taking notes. Like I'm very aware of this, like in more than any other like academic conference that I've been to, where it's usually in like a, hotel setting. There's something different about, did that occur to you at all, Matt? Like when you were there?
It did not so much. I mean,
fair enough.
The chairs are less comfortable when you're doing this in a classroom setting. That's true.
All right, we're going to cut that out. Now, at the same time you were doing that panel, there was another panel going on, which was one of our rival podcasts, the And But So Show, had a panel. So none of us attended that one, but I did get to meet Colleen from that show. And I only wish that I had been able to attend their panel, because it was called Hate Reading Infinite Jest.
Can we even call them a rival podcast? They have 0 episodes so far.
Well, they said they had a sneak peek at that point, but I mean, I think at the conference, Colleen set up the feed so that there is at least I think there's a teaser now in their And But So show.
Oh, cool.
But I do want to give them a plug. So like if down the road, if you want to go listen to, Two Women Hate Read Infinite Jest, go check out And But So Show
that's a great name, I think.
Apple Podcast.
I'm very impressed with the title. I met Colleen last year, and she showed up wearing a shirt that said, "I haven't read Infinite Jest," which I thought was really rad. That's a cool move to do at a conference about Wallace. And we had a good chat on the way to Medici's one day about what it's like to podcast about this stuff. So I look forward to their future releases.
Yes, I hope that we get to hear more about their show.
Yeah, I hope they just put us on blast the whole time, and Wallace.
That's fine. So, Matt, after your panel, did you go to another panel, or did you just like go and collapse, or what was your plan?
Actually, I'm looking at the schedule right now. What I went to next was, one interesting thing about this conference is there is the occasional panel on contemporary writing that is not by Wallace, but is by folks who are often part of the same conversation, folks who are kind of Wallace adjacent.
Right.
Went to that, heard a paper on Jonathan Lethem on Chronic City, Dave.
Hey, I saw that. I know I saw that in the loadout, and I was pretty psyched. Tell me more.
I just have to give a plug for Matt Luter's book, Understanding Jonathan Lethem, as why you might have an interest in this panel.
Yeah, you're the Marshall Boswell of Lethem studies, Matt Luter.
If you say so, Dave. You say so.
I do, and I have said that before. I stand by it.
But paper about the sort of how the virtual reality world works in that novel. The other paper in that panel I really liked. It was about Kerouac. I am not a huge Kerouac guy, but it was a paper on the French Canadianness of Kerouac.
Oh yeah, I saw the title of that. Cool.
And basically did some really interesting historical work with how the term whiteness has been constructed and defined in Canada over time. And so, if I'm summarizing it correctly, was sort of getting at the idea that given some cultural attitudes within his part of the country at the time, it's possible that Kerouac would have grown up not thinking of himself necessarily as white, but as a kind of an ethnic other, which then kind of sheds new light on something like in On the Road, in other writing by Kerouac, in which he is doing some identifying with the other in ways that I know some readers find off-putting. Really, one of my favorite papers I heard this year, I would say.
Cool. Did you?
That's super interesting.
Did you get cited in the Chronic City paper?
I did not.
And if not, why?
I did not, and that is okay. And that's not why I went to the panel.
Did I get cited in the Lethem paper?
You did not either, Dave. I went to the panel to hear some.
Where's this guy come from?
I went to the panel to hear someone talk about Jonathan Lethem, not to.
That's the only reason I would have gone, man. Vanity.
Okay. I have a medium strong interest still in Kerouac and the Beats and probably Gary Snyder in particular. I don't know if I've ever given a plug for this, but like one of my all-time favorite audiobooks is the On the Road version read by Matt Dillon. So I think if you've never read On the Road and you don't want to read it, but you would be up for listening to
That's
it,
where I'm at.
go find the Matt Dillon version of it, because he's a performer, and we had an audiobook guy at the conference. Hint, hint. We'll get to that in a minute. But like, I'm super interested in this French-Canadian connection because I don't know that anyone has really made the same connection to Infinite Jest, and I don't know if he really did that. It sounds like he didn't do that in the panel per se.
Not really.
This idea of the other.
But. He didn't really draw that connection, but I was thinking it did sort of still kind of serendipitously fit really nicely in the conference. I mean, like when we are talking about Infinite Jest, we find ourselves talking about French Canadians, don't we? So
I do, yeah,
for real. So there were other Thursday panels. I want to keep going out of respect for people's time, but I missed Chiara Scarlato also had a panel at that time, and Emilio. And Emilio, a friend of the pod, had a really great paper about the copy editing of Infinite Jest. And Chiara, who I should mention, give a shout out to, is in Austin right now, and I hung out with yesterday.
Oh, cool.
And she gave a great paper about Foucault, which I missed, but she sent it to me and I read it, and it's amazing. So if you're into Foucault, follow up with Chiara Scarlato from Italy. It was amazing because it was also her like first time in the U.S. And there's always people at the conference like this, where it's their first time, not only in Illinois but like in the U.S.
Right. Did she come with Pia from Italy?
Pia was there.
I saw that.
I don't know if she came with Pia, but
Pia's cool.
Yes.
What's up, Pia? Shout out.
So Matt, after that, did you go to Samantha and Mike's panel?
I did, yes. Samantha, no relation,
Okay.
Wallace. I
Also on masculinity, right? Masculinity.
yes. I think one of her sort of jumping off points, if I'm remembering correctly, was a lot of people say that in one's first read of Infinite Jest, the impulse is often to identify with Hal, and then later on people wind up identifying with Gately. And
I've said that.
Matt, you have said that.
And she was sort of going towards, well, what if we think maybe less about Hal or Don Gately as the center of the novel, but Avril or Joelle.
Right.
And the way she was getting at this was the suggestion that I'm looking at my notes. She used the phrase human sameness, and I am not certain if that is Samantha's language or if that is quoting Wallace, but that being sort of one definition of empathy, this sort of recognition of the idea that people are basically the same and we share experiences. She was sort of getting at, like, if the locus of identification stays Hal or Don Gately, then that interhuman sameness doesn't totally play out because all of those points of identification are male. And
right.
So sort of proposing a kind of alternative center for the novel that sort of redefines empathy or readerly empathy in a really interesting way.
That's super interesting, and I feel like it's something we need to talk about more. And that some of that came up in our diversity panel,
right?
And I think Samantha was there, and we talked kind of about this concept. Probably not in the kind of academic aesthetic conversation that she was having there, but I think that's, because what occurs to me when you're saying that is like, well, are we expecting too much of Wallace? Like in this book, is he supposed to? Is it really his goal to relate to all of humanity and do all the other stuff that he's doing? Are we putting too much demands on the book, on him? Is the book a failure, as Claire Hayes Brady argues? Do other aspects of the novel make it a failure? I think that's a really interesting conversation. Mm. I guess that wasn't a question for you, Matt. Sorry.
That's okay.
So Mike Miley's paper was on David Lynch.
Yeah. I really, really liked this one a lot as well.
Yeah, it was fun.
Basically, he was suggesting that Lynch is sort of the model for Wallace, maybe more than anyone else, for how to be a commercial artist. He sort of started off by kind of poking fun at, like, do we need another influence study? We have talked about Pynchon. We have talked about DeLillo, all of this. Yeah. And he was making the case, well, the difference here is Lynch has more than one kind of language to work from, given all that he can do with the visual, given all that he can do with sound, that a writer can't. And he kind of traced some similarities in the career, how they have some early success, then sort of have a big, splashy, weird entry into the mainstream with Infinite Jest or with Blue Velvet, and then how sort of later work just keeps getting kind of more and more idiosyncratic while still kind of staying on people's radar. Made a really good case that Lynch is someone that you could look at as a model for how to be sort of weird and idiosyncratic, but also weirdly mainstream, and also sort of staying in the marketplace even on his own terms. I know we've heard a lot of lot of references to the interaction Wallace had with DeLillo about, is it okay to do a TV interview, so forth, wanting to figure out like to what extent being in the marketplace was something he felt comfortable with. And a lot of what Mike was suggesting is it's not just that Lynch is similarly experimental, but it's that he finds a way to walk that tightrope. And that connection I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it was good.
And
yeah, Mike sent us the paper. I really like the opening too. Where he kind of
David
sets it up as like David, gets an MFA and has this initial success, and then reveals that it's David Lynch and not David Wallace.
Yeah. Good, really good media slideshow to go along with it too. It's quite funny and well timed. Once he got it working.
I'm realizing we're not even through Thursday yet. Like, there's no way we're going to be able to talk about all of these panels that I took notes on. Anything else you want to say after that? Did you see Tom Winchester's panel? Or I guess Tom's got moved, right? Tom had one.
I think so. Yeah, I was not able to see Tom, sadly.
So a lot of the stuff, because I have my notes and then the program, but like I realize now going by the program isn't 100% of the reality because a lot of things got moved to the last minute. But I will take a brief side thing to say that we had an amazing time on Thursday night at karaoke.
Conference MVP. I think,
that was one of the best times of the whole thing. There was a little group of us who sought out a pretty authentic karaoke experience in Bloomington Normal, Illinois, at a place called Pheasant Lanes, which is quite a sight to behold.
Is it a bowling alley that also has karaoke?
And mini golf and beach volleyball.
Yeah.
And a mini casino. There's gambling
volleyball?
in there too. Outdoor.
That's dope.
So that's part of what you're getting with the conference is the ability to switch from talking about like the aesthetics of representation to immediately going into karaoke, which is pretty amazing.
Indeed.
Yep, I cried a little bit that I missed that, especially.
So that's basically when I showed up, was at dinner the next night. So I missed the whole thing until the extracurriculars, and my ideas about the panels don't really begin until the next morning, which I have to say the whole next day, which was Friday at the conference, was a little bit colored by me, and Matt can vouch for this a little bit, is like the suicide of Anthony Bourdain.
Right.
And that was like very, very shocking thing to wake up to for me. And, being at a conference about David Foster Wallace, who committed suicide himself, I was very, aware of that the whole time. And I sort of, not many people I felt like at the conference had the same reaction that I did, which was also even more bizarre because I felt like in my day-to-day life, in 2008, not many people had the same reaction that I did, but those who did reached out to me. So that sort of informed my morning. And the pretty much the rest of the day for me.
Yeah.
I did go to a panel with a guy named Max Chapnick and Dominic Steinhilber, and Dominic from Germany was there. And his paper was super interesting about the idea of the Doppler effect and parallax, and comparing it to like Ulysses, and basically saying like Wallace had misattributed parallax to the Doppler effect, and kind of illustrated this through like Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry as it relates to parallel lines.
Okay. That's wild.
Super interesting. And he had probably the best PowerPoint of anyone that I saw.
Agreed.
Because it was animated. Were you at this panel, Matt?
I was. This would have been a really difficult paper to take in without his visuals, and they helped so much, particularly with that idea that with just the question of what is he doing here using a term that refers to sound to describe things visually, and using a term that refers to the visual to describe sounds. It was a fun paper about Euclidean geometry.
Yes, and the other paper, Max, he was also talking about a lot of the sort of advanced and abstract math and infinite jest, which, is not my strong suit, and I have trouble following. And, I feel like at this point, I really need to apologize to everyone who we have not named yet, that I missed their panels. And that's one bad thing about this conference, is that you have to decide, you go to this panel, that means you're missing 2 other panels, So I missed Jeffrey Tucker, George Vance, Christopher White. I missed Pia's panel. On and on and on. All of these people who I'm going to name, I missed their stuff. Ryan Kerr, Catherine Metcalf.
I just noticed, Matt, I didn't mention the names earlier on the Leatham and the Kerouac paper. The Leatham paper was David Hansen. The Kerouac paper was Justin Charon. Shouts out.
I like shouts
either way.
Shout outs?
Either way to both.
And they were both ISU, is that right? They were ISU people?
Justin is. I don't believe. Actually, no, they both are. That's true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was the ISU panel. It's really too bad that I missed that one. But I would say that we did get to talk to a couple of these people in the hallway, and I do want to get to some of the hallway conversations in a minute. And shout out to Dominic and Max Chapman, really for putting on a pretty incredible, I thought, super interesting panel about if you're into non-Euclidean, parallel lines.
Was there a panel on Byzantine erotica as well?
It did get mentioned several times, in fact. In fact, I could tell you off the top of my head, Daniel Leonard for sure mentioned Byzantine erotica.
Right, a boy, Daniel.
The next one I have notes on was Andrea and Grace's panel, and Matt's already kind of mentioned Grace's paper about Wallace studies and what did you call it? Post-critical analysis. And I took a ton of notes, but I thought it was super interesting. And I thought Andrea's was also pretty interesting.
Cool. Man, Grace is OG, hey? She's come 3 times to this conference from Australia, 3 years in a row, I think. Is that right?
Well, she's in Austin right now, actually. So.
Oh, that's nevertheless.
But
well done,
still,
Grace.
Yes, OG, definitely. And what Matt was saying at the beginning of the show about how you can kind of take a pulse of Wallace studies, and the first couple years it was a lot about the role of fandom, and the past couple years have been a lot about the role of women. Can you be a woman and read Infinite Jest and be a fan of it?
And not
more
just
than that.
cringe your way through it.
Well, and I'm collapsing a lot of arguments into a sort of shorthand here, but I thought, and maybe Matt can speak to this better than me, but I thought that Grace's paper actually combined some of these arguments into a slightly new way forward, which was talking about, can you even be a fan and a critic? And that, we hope the answer is yes. And that if so, as a woman, what does that look like? And, I'm going to have to go back to my notes here, but, because again, I was also feeling the Anthony Bourdain thing in the middle of this.
I think some of Danielle's paper pointed to some of this as well, because she was talking about the idea of the resisting reader and the assenting reader, readers who read suspiciously as opposed to readers who read sort of a bit more openly. She was not. She did make some reference to questions of gender, but she was sort of framing it actually through, in part Jonathan Franzen and the whole idea of the contract of big books being contract novels or status novels, and that status novels sometimes get resistant readers who are just barreling through something that is not enjoyable necessarily.
And I should say, Grace didn't frame it in terms of gender either. I mean, I'm sort of doing that extraneously for no reason, maybe, but Grace sort of framed it in terms of like
of the personal and
personal and post-critical. What you were saying is like some of that had to do with the way she made a pretty good argument that like, okay, maybe Wallace doesn't do voices of other people of color and women very well, but he does mental health really well, and that relates to people, what other kind of person you are. And so maybe you're a woman, maybe you're not, but like if he's relating to you on this level. And she quoted a lot of stuff from the Meredith Rand chapter in The Pale King, and it made me go back and read some of that in the past week, and I was like, damn, this is some of Wallace's best work.
That's good. And
if you haven't gone back and read the Meredith Rand stuff, I strongly encourage it. But I thought it was she made a lot of interesting points about kind of being an authority on a work and being distant from it, and like, do you really have to be distant from it? She also quoted like Ann Chetkovich and as you said, Rita Felsky, who've done a lot of work in this area. In Andrea's paper, she quoted a guy saying like, I think it was a student who said, I hate that I love him so much.
Yeah. She mentioned that when she was on a couple episodes ago, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I've that's stuck with me because I think that's true for a lot of readers, and it wasn't necessarily my reaction initially, but she made some interesting comparisons with teaching Forever Overhead and how it relates to students. And we also talked about, what other authors were, sort of generating this kind of like personal reading. And some of the names that came up were like Sylvia Plath. And I think even Mike Miley brought up, like, when you're talking about author as character, like Hunter S. Thompson, or even some of the beats that we were talking about a minute ago. Do you remember any of this, Matt?
I do. I remember wondering aloud a little bit. I guess my reaction was, since Plath and Hunter S. Thompson both went through these phases in sort of the public imagination, where their personas became really reduced to broad strokes. Maybe I wondered if maybe we are in that moment with Wallace right now. And Plath, people read her with way more depth now, I sense, than when she was sort of viewed a little more reductively and stereotypically, maybe a generation or so ago, is my understanding. Maybe the same thing with Thompson. And so that was my sort of, and I don't have a great answer, a perfect, well thought out answer to that yet, but that was kind of wondering aloud where I was there. I like those comparisons to Thompson, to Plath.
Well, you and I talked about too how they're anthologized, right?
Right.
And the way that Sylvia Plath and maybe the beats to some extent are anthologized really influences the way that they're read.
Yeah.
That undergraduate students encounter them for the first time. And, I wonder what that is like to watch in real time as someone gets sort of added to the canon. I mean, and so Wallace is in the new Norton anthology. Can you remind me of that?
There is a cluster of creative nonfiction in the post-1945 volume of this most recent Norton, and it includes a little bit of Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It includes, I want to say, some Edward Abbey. I want to say some Hunter S. Thompson. And it includes an excerpt of Consider the Lobster.
Which excerpt?
And
you know,
it is
Consider the Lobster, right?
but not the whole thing, just part of it.
It includes an excerpt of the essay Consider the Lobster. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And can we say who the editor of the volume is?
Is my understanding is Amy Hungerford.
Matt's just
crazy
baiting
world,
you.
man. Crazy world. And for those who don't know, listening out there, like Amy Hungerford wrote a famous essay about basically why you shouldn't read Infinite Jest or David Foster Wallace in general. Maybe.
Jest, right? Some people did
right,
not like that very much.
Well, and it's sort of like, you know, did she really pick this? I don't know. It's an interesting development in the sort of ongoing canonical conversation.
Sure, and loads of, I mean, I don't have deep knowledge of this, but I have some anecdotal knowledge of this, that like so many different interests, different rights issues, all kinds of stuff comes up in anthology making. So yeah,
I believe that.
Sorry I went off on this tangent. Again, I feel like I'm not going to do justice to the whole conference at this point. I missed Danielle's panel next because I was part of a diversity panel and actually set that out and just sat in the audience, and I asked Wendy Liu to take my place on the diversity panel. Thought we had a good discussion in there.
Cool.
But it meant that I missed Danielle's paper about her creative piece. And this, if you've never been to this conference, there's like a fair amount of creative writing presentations, which is always interesting. I also missed Corey Hudson and Martin Brick, two really great scholars. Matt, did you attend that panel at all?
I was not able to. I was there with you at the diversity panel.
Diversity.
Are we gonna?
Anything else you want to say about that? I mean, I actually don't have great notes from that. Go ahead.
You did all the talking, so therefore you don't have notes. Is that what you're saying?
Hey, it's America, baby.
One thing that I appreciated is there was discussion of sort of different axes, I guess, of breadth of voices. There was, as we might expect, a great deal of discussion of gender, but there were also people thinking about class, thinking about heteronormativity. It was a panel that was certainly informed by a lot of the Me Too inspired discussions that are currently happening about Wallace, but it was not limited to that at all. And it was really, really sort of freewheeling discussion. It was nice.
Yeah, no, that's true. And there was a lot of talk about like stereotypes and sort of, how do we fight against those in some ways? And there was some talk of like, okay, you can have diversity on your table of contents, but then what else? And one thing, this kind of leads into the next discussion, which is about the keynote from Claire Hayes Brady, which was like, the consensus felt like it was better to critically engage this discussion rather than to avoid it and disengage it. And I think there is some criticism of Wallace studies in general or Wallace society about like, oh, well, they don't really, there's not an immediate response to this thing. And I would say, to that, it takes some time, it takes some time to flesh out like what the, how is it best to engage rather than disengage. But everyone seemed to sort of agree that it was better to sort of, like I say, critically engage rather than not engage with these subjects. And there was some just like, it wasn't all perfect. Like there was some like talk of like, everyone was an asshole in the 90s. Like if you held up like,
and then
our standards,
they're still all assholes if you haven't noticed as well.
Well, 20 plus years ago is like, it's pretty easy to find stuff that doesn't fit our standards today.
Yeah.
And, it's not necessarily an excuse, but like,
no,
what can we do? And I felt like there was a lot of stuff that I want to follow up from that panel.
Yeah, I'm curious to know from your guys' perspective what kind of like splash or kind of how did the vibe shift a bit maybe at this conference from some of the recent Mary Carr stuff? We're talking about the Me Too movement, some of the stuff she put on Twitter, last month or a couple months ago. Was that kind of palpable? Was that something people were talking about in discussions in the hallway? What was your read?
I heard two separate references to that Guardian piece from a couple of weeks ago that sort of suggested that basically a male-centered literary canon has helped create the alt-right.
That's pretty dark.
It is. I'm not crazy about that Guardian piece. I think it is assuming that. Let me think how to put this.
This is the piece that's sort of saying like literature is slightly to blame for a lot of our like male centric worldview.
Yes,
is that right?
Yeah, because Samantha's paper engaged this, and Claire made brief reference to it, and I think I know definitely that was an article that seemed to be in a lot of people's recent reading. Mm-hmm. Claire made some reference to did she not, Matt, to the
yes. Right off the bat,
to the Mary Carr comments as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she did like right at the beginning of her speech. And, I would say my experience of this is a little bit influenced also by a panel that Mike Miley and I were on with Ryan Lackey and Alex Moran at the American Literature Association at the end of May of this year in San Francisco. And we sponsored this panel, the David Foster Wallace Society did, to talk about this issue of great male narcissists and Updike, and then Mary Carr posted this series of tweets talking about and really in response to the Juno Diaz scandal, and so we did a lot of engaging with that there at the American Literature Association. And my sort of impression was that there were a couple of things that Claire agreed with at our keynote at last week's conference, which is that it's better to critically engage and say, okay, yes, if this was true, then what? And then how do we go forward from this? And one thing I would say outside of all of those things, personally, if you look at those couple of tweets, I think that there's some muddying of the waters and confusing a couple of different issues in here that makes it hard to talk about. And one is that Mary Carr says something about the biography that DT Max only listened to or didn't listen to it and didn't include it, which right. I think is factually incorrect, and that he did include that in the biography, and like the 3 or 4 things that she mentions as specific incidents are in the biography. And a lot of the articles, like there was an article in the Atlantic that said, this is not new information per se, but it's new in a different context.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to say, is that, well, we've had this out there for a while. Why wasn't it part of the discussion, a year ago or 6 years ago when the book came out?
Right.
So, that's part of it. The other thing is that she said something about, well, Juno Diaz, blah, 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 but Wallace was white. and bringing like whiteness studies into this, and like an accusation that because he's white and therefore declared like a genius, maybe we're letting him a pass. And like I feel like it's really hard to read into what she was trying to get at with that statement. And I didn't hear a lot of engagement at either panel with that topic in this same context.
Interesting.
So I think it's a super complex thing that is going to affect Wallace studies for a long time. But I also, and I don't think we should like try to not like talk about it or try to defend Wallace's actions. But I also think like, him being white and Junot Diaz not being white, I don't know how much that plays into it. I thought that was kind of wild that was the context that she brought it up in. Anywho, my notes from there go straight into the keynote. Matt, do you want to talk about any more on the keynote?
I don't know that I have anything else on it. Yeah.
I mean, she did a pretty interesting turn of events about toxic masculinity.
Yes.
And she even talked about the death of Lucien Antitoy. I'm probably saying that wrong, about his sort of anti-masculine death, the way that he was sort of
impaled on the broomsticks, right?
Yeah. My other notes are all about how cold the room was. And I was feeling very, very sad about Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
And no, everyone sort of thought it was a great keynote, and Claire did a great job. She was, pre-recorded the keynote from Dublin, which was an interesting experience because she also called in, so there was like 2 Claires on the board.
That's very Lynchian, I think. Going back to Mike's paper.
And
it's like in Lost Highway,
I remember
the phone call with the guys there and somewhere else at the same time.
Exactly. And I remember, do you remember this, Matt, is that I remember if we had Jeff Severs on here, he would probably speak to this more, that he kind of asked about Nabokov. And he brought this back to sort of saying like, well, how was Nabokov received in, the early 60s when he's writing about like, basically a pedophile in Humbert. And what was that sort of, reaction in terms of the author? I thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah.
Trying to think, what was next? Do you recall where we went after that, Matt?
I think not long after that we had the visit from Sean Pratt, right? Talking about the audiobook of Infinite Jest.
That's right. Sean Pratt showed up, and he was also, a former guest on the show. And he did a great talk about, how the audiobook came to be and sort of backstory to it. And then he also did a
workshop right?
talking about how, audiobooks are produced. And he had his like script up, an excerpt of it, and showed how he marks it up and then sort of read from the excerpt. And that was super great to have him there and be a part of the conference.
Yeah, that's fun. Did he do the Ken Erdity section waiting for the woman who said she'd come?
That's right.
Because on the episode he talks about how he frequently uses that passage to demonstrate expert pacing in narrative.
That's correct. Yep.
Cool. That's fun that he did that then.
Yep. And then we had a society meeting, which I'll skip over and say we also had a memorial thing for Charlie Harris.
Right.
I think it was that same night.
Yes.
Which was really great. And Bob McLaughlin read a great remembrance of Charlie.
Oh, that's sweet.
And anything else on that day, Matt?
It was, I would just mention I enjoyed Bob's remembrance so much because it was not about Charlie Harris, pillar of study of contemporary fiction. It was very much just about his friend, and his colleague. Like he was referring to him certainly as a colleague at ISU, but it was really, really well done.
I would expect nothing less from him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of the high points of the conference, I felt like. Actually, I think I'm looking back at my notes, and I think maybe did Alex Moran and Tom Moore's paper get moved to that day? Got moved around.
I don't recall. I definitely saw and enjoyed both of those.
I think that got moved to Friday, and Tom Moore gave a great thing about Donald Bartlemy's The Balloon.
Oh, right, yeah.
And
saw that.
And Alex Moran talked about opiates and like the opioid epidemic, which was super fascinating.
Huh.
Alex's paper
in the context of what?
I'll tell you.
Well,
yes,
Alex's
I was not
paper,
there. Please do.
Alex's paper would be another candidate for me for one of my favorites that I heard at the whole conference. I mean, Dave, it was about sort of the idea of a lineage of fiction about opiates.
Mm-hmm.
So taking Infinite Jest, but going all the way back to things like De Quincey, things like Confessions of an Opium Eater, and then going through mid-century stuff like Man with the Golden Arm. But he was also
Oscar Wilde?
of. I don't know if he meant
that was.
Did he mention Oscar Wilde, Matt?
Dorian Gray or anything?
I don't know. That's Nelson Algren, right?
Man with the Golden Arm, Nelson Algren, yeah.
Yeah, I just mean, was Dorian Gray part of that conversation?
I don't know. One interesting thing he did say was that OxyContin was approved the year Infinite Jest was published. I thought that was interesting.
Wow.
And so there was he did some really interesting linking it up to historically what has been approved for medical use, what is available over the counter, what is illegal at different points in this lineage. Really, really interesting stuff.
Cool.
Well, in his paper too, he had it really well structured, and he said at first he was going to structure his paper like an opium plant. I thought that was interesting. But the first part of it, I wrote this down, he was talking about chronic pain, and then he was really meaning like psychic pain, but chronic pain being like something that must be treated, and it is treated in Infinite Jest with, drugs, and then the gradual criminalization of the addict, which is super interesting part of Infinite Jest, and then the commercialization of opiates. And all of this was sort of built on the argument that, we should just look at the surface of the text, and that at a very surface level, there's a lot going on about opiates and pain and addiction. And, how do we talk about that in terms of a historical novel? I thought I'd never heard anything like it. So, Matt, I thought it was
that's cool.
One of the most interesting.
And that the thing he was citing, the concept of surface reading, there are a couple of sort of kind of widely read articles on it now that have become kind of foundational to the whole post-critical thing. So, I mean, I would put Alex's paper in that category too.
Yeah, and not to take anything away from Tom's paper, who was also there and just super interesting. We brought in stuff about, the balloon, which I've never heard anyone talk about. Wallace said that is what made him become a writer.
That's right, yeah.
And then talked about, metafiction and sort of how Bartlemy is neglected, and, are these writers metafictionally like apolitical, or are they political, saying something about consumer culture? And he talked about the collage, and it was a really great paper as well. So
cool.
Agreed.
Was Alex as well dressed as usual in previous years? Always a tie.
Yes, I'm just gonna say yes.
Always
I don't even remember, but I'm gonna say yes.
I show up in t-shirts last year and academic shorts, and Alex Moran is always like practically in a suit.
Well, I know Tom Moore was in a tie. I remember Tom was in a
too.
tie,
Sharp guy.
And Alex and I hung out a lot in San Francisco for ALA.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. That guy's got like the most Mike Pemulus vibe of anyone in the Wallace community, I think. But by virtue of the way that he talks in such a like quiet, lilting British accent. but you know that he's just kind of like looking around from side to side before he says something, because it's usually very biting and witty.
Oh God. Ditto. I feel like we're never gonna make it all the way through these like discussions that I want to get through, and like, I went to a panel with Vernon Cisney talking about the Great Ohio Desert, and Hamed Tayebi talking about maps. That was phenomenal. I went to Carly's panel about lying, Carly Yinkst, about lying, and
from Harvard, right?
Yep, from Harvard. It was super interesting talking about this New Yorker article from Salman Rushdie, and like, is fiction lying? I thought that was pretty great.
I'm reading Salman Rushdie novel right now, Midnight's Children. Almost close to finishing. It's pretty long.
I mean, didn't that win the Booker Prize in like 1981 or something like that?
Yeah, that sounds right. Ish. Something like that.
I mean, it's all right for me, man. It's just, it doesn't ring my cherries the way it used to. But this guy Jameson, did you see this panel he did about tennis? It was all about tennis, man.
I did. I think y'all both have more tennis knowledge than I do, and so I appreciated this one because it was getting at how some of the distinctions about different sort of styles of play that in tennis, and how he talks about them in the nonfiction can actually shed some light on, if memory serves, how we perhaps ought to read certain characters in Infinite Jest.
Based on their play styles?
Yes.
And I mean, and that for me is just, I mean, that is a realm of information that that I need someone to explain to me, because I have no doubt that it is all there on the page, but I'm not attuned to it. And so just hearing, I'm not attuned to it naturally until someone like Jameson comes along and draws my attention to it. So like that, I mean, that's sort of what a great conference paper is for. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, and you're vastly overestimating my own tennis knowledge, which, you know, can be inscribed on the rim of a shot glass with a crayon.
Dull crayon.
But he did bring up some interesting stuff about like the power baseline game as it relates to, again, certain characters in Infinite Jest. And I was sort of blown away by that because I had not given it much serious thought. And I think Jameson is also on your side of the concavity up there in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
And then I think Carly was on the panel with Daniel Leonard talking about Avril. And this is the panel for like people who love talking about Infinite Jest.
Yeah.
and like this panel was freaking awesome. And like, we got to get Daniel to just sort of recreate the whole thing, because he pulled out these connections that basically argued that Luria P is Avril. You know, or let me back that up. That like Luria,
like
Luria
P,
P,
like the Swiss
model? Hand model. The Swiss hand model is Luria, is Avril, and that there's this sort of tripling of a character. You know, we talk a lot about double binds and doubling of characters, but to talk about tripling of characters,
Oren has like a tryst with her, right? With Luria P. Okay, yeah. So the whole Oedipal argument thing that with Oren that comes up a lot, that would wildly confirm that.
Yes, and I thought an interesting point. I think it was Vernon who actually made this point to say that, you know, we call her the moms, like the plural moms, because she has more than one personality. I thought that was interesting. And like, if you rearrange the letters of like Luria, you can sort of get Avril if you change the U to a V. Okay. I thought that was really, it was
little
good paper.
Anagram action on the panel.
Yeah. We actually had a sort of sub theme in the conference of anagrams. Wouldn't you say?
We did.
Pray tell.
Okay.
Shit.
This
Okay.
is scoops.
Okay.
These are the scoops I came for.
These are the scoops
This
that
is
you
gossip,
came for, Dave.
yeah.
Okay, so silly thing. I think silly thing. I think it's good to have an alter ego.
Just
Ideally,
at all times. Is that what you
yes.
mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Ideally, your alter ego should be an anagram of your real name. Okay, so I have. If you anagram Matthew Luter, it anagrams really easily to Walter Hummett, and so there you go. There's mine.
Okay.
And
Tell
this
us more
came
about
up-
this alter ego.
This came up actually at karaoke, and because some
Naturally.
people were putting up stage names, when they're signing the list and so forth.
What did Walter Hummett sing at karaoke? What's his vibe musically?
Well, I think this conversation happened after I had signed the list. So Walter didn't sing anything.
Walter missed out. Okay.
Yeah, Matt Luter sang "Surrender" by Cheap Trick.
Yes.
So I
amazing.
mentioned this, and the alter ego anagram thing. People start getting a napkin and like scrawling out their name and moving the letters around, and I mentioned this to one side of the table, and then I mentioned this to Matt Booker's side of the table. And I'm like, Matt, we should all have alter egos, and ideally your alter ego is an anagram of your name. And without missing a beat, Matt says,
I have one.
go for it.
It's Brett Chatham.
Brett Chatham.
Brett Chatham. I was like, I've done this. I'm in. I was like, I've got one.
Nice.
Just no hesitation. I was like, oh, you want an anagram of my name, alter ego, Brett Chatham. Boom. And so I was one of those ones who immediately like, we got to get everyone to have one of these anagrams.
I'm going to enter my name into an anagram maker online right now, and I'll get back to you guys in a second.
Okay.
You should definitely come up with one. We came up with some really good ones for Danielle and for Andrea. But yeah, anagram was a sort of sub-theme of the conference, I would say. And if you don't have an anagram for your name, make one and send it in to us. I would love to post, just like tweet out a long list of everyone's like anagram names. Walter Hummett.
Advil Dare. That's mine.
Advil Dare.
I've
never met anyone named Advil.
Pretty good, huh? There's actually like hundreds of entries that came out when I entered mine.
I don't know.
You guys just put me down a really nice rabbit hole. Thank you for that.
All right. That's interesting. So Daniel Leonard, I got to go back to his paper for one more thing, because I think last year he presented on John Berryman. Maybe I'm mistaken about this, but I know that his panel was moderated by Jeff Severs, and Jeff Severs mentioned like, oh, Daniel's an expert on the dream songs with John Berryman, who's also a suicide. And if you haven't read his poems, they're super interesting. And he talked about the sort of infinite just connections to the dream songs, which I've sort of gone back to now. And I pulled that book off my shelf. And, in the dream songs, the main character is named Henry, and he's like digging up his father's grave. And that was a great panel. Like, if you're looking for infinite just connections, for sure.
Cool.
What did you go to next, Matt? Let's do one or two quick things, and then maybe we should wrap it up here.
I would also mention another favorite for me was Peter Christensen speaking about Everything and More. I have to admit, I have not read Everything and More. I know I am not alone.
You're not, no.
And I know this because the first thing that Peter did in his presentation was just say, show of hands, who has read Everything and More. And it was very few people in the room.
Yeah, I think that happened maybe last year, and there was like 3 people in the room or something like that.
But he made a really interesting case that perhaps we shouldn't be scared off by the math, because there's a lot in it.
I agree.
There's a lot in it that would be familiar to any Wallace reader. There are, from the surface level of their footnotes and then footnotes to footnotes, but then also just to sort of some of the narrative stuff he does with telling the story of some of these mathematicians and how they involve sort of father-son conflict, how they involve these other sort of like narrative tropes that do show up elsewhere in Wallace's own fiction. And so I've been slightly scared off by the math. I've also been I've also not taken it on because, and maybe y'all have had this or a similar experience with this. It feels to me like there is something very sad in reading the last thing you haven't read by a writer.
Oh yeah, that's true. I know a lot of people who have not read The Pale King for that reason.
Well, yeah, I understand. I put off for the longest time DeLillo's Ratner's Star because I wanted there to be always one more for me.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, Ratner's Star is a book that is very much about math. So we're learning something else about what scares me off.
I will say about Everything and More, you should be afraid of the math elements of the book. I have a very little math background, and like after page 100, after he finishes giving like the history of the concept of infinity in mathematics, I got like almost virtually lost for the whole rest of the book. However, I agree with what you were just saying about the person's comments that there's still so many Wallacean elements to even the really heavy math stuff that is very enjoyable to a Wallace fan.
So if I were to take it on, Dave, will we count this as an entry in Summer of Mega Novels, even though it is neither mega nor novel?
On a level of challenge, I think it's there. It's a challenging book.
Okay.
For sure.
All right. This is my thing now. Big books. Summer is for big books.
Summer's for big books. I'll read the mystery doc this summer then. We're gonna
honestly, I'm still reading Novel Explosives by Jim Gower, which you should all read. Yeah, it's freaking awesome.
It's on my list.
It's amazing.
Oh, good.
It's amazing.
Dave, I love the see. This is perfect because last year we had a very lopsided agreement.
Our bet was very low. Yeah, I got a really good deal out of that.
Yeah, so if you should keep up with the mystery doc and I'll take on Everything and More.
Yeah, that would be a fair equivalent trade to last year to make things even. Yeah.
Nice.
I mean that's kind of sad for me. I'm not sure that there's any Wallace that I haven't read.
Yeah.
And not in a braggy way, just because I've been reading the guy for 20 years and
sure.
He's been dead for almost 10 years. And I mean, I'm pretty sure, even though like Everything and More is definitely the hardest one to read, Wallace is trying to make it accessible.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And I wish that I had seen Peter's paper about this so that I could, go back to it. That's probably the book that I'm least likely to pick up again.
For me, it's Fate, Time, and Language, but that would be second.
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, that barely even counts.
Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty rough go.
I mean, but what was the sort of argument that we should like count it as part of his nonfiction canon or repertoire, or what was the argument, Matt?
Largely, let's see. I'm looking back at my notes. He says, okay, Peter said, D.T. Max suggests in the biography that the book is basically a dare. And kind of Wallace like throwing down the gauntlet to other writers, saying like, could you pull something like this off? But in career context, Peter was saying it's really about getting readers into his head too. And that I was convinced that. He also sort of speculated that when because it was published on Norton, right, and they had in mind an idea for a sort of series of books where notable writers would explain difficult abstract concepts that are kind of in their wheelhouse. And Peter kind of speculated that Norton kind of wanted him to go a little more philosophical than mathematical, and that perhaps Wallace didn't go terribly philosophical because that might involve entering his father's discipline.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah. Also mentioned that he was doing this, that he started it while he was in Bloomington Normal, moved to Claremont with it in progress while he was also finalizing Oblivion and working on Pale King. So that it could almost be, Peter was saying, a little bit of an outlet from the bleakness of a lot of Oblivion, and that was another really valuable piece of that paper, I think, is putting it in career context, since we do talk of it often as this kind of oddity.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That sounds like a fun paper.
It was.
And I feel like we're running out of time now, but I have to say about one other panel. And again, I wish that I could have attended more, and I did not. And so if I did not mention your name, I sincerely apologize. But the one other panel that I attended, which was phenomenal, was about teaching Wallace. And it was Vernon Sisney from Gettysburg College. And he had 3 undergrad students with him. It was Vera, Maddie, and Daniel, and they each sort of presented their research, and all of their papers were amazing, and I was super, super impressed by all 3 of their papers, and I thought that was a really great way of, broadening the discussion in the panels and in the conference by bringing them involved, getting them involved.
Awesome.
Matt, anything else that you want to mention in terms of panels that we haven't mentioned?
I think that about covers what I had notes on.
Okay, I had one other mention, which is I want to go back to Emilio and Emilio's panel about copy editing Infinite Jest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Emilio had such great access to the drafts of Infinite Jest because he is a volunteer at the Ransom Center here in Austin. And Emilio, as part of his generous nature, has donated a giveaway to a listener of the podcast, and that is a pretty nice water bottle that is it's like stainless steel. What would you say?
Yeah, it looks like that. Dark red stainless steel.
And it's a water bottle that was given to volunteers at the Ransom Center that says, "This is water" on it, which I thought was pretty clever. And I think that the person who gives us the best anagram of their name should win this water bottle.
I like that.
So we've already said we need to hear more anagrams of your name. So if you have an alter ego identity of your name, send it in, tweet it, email us, Instagram it, direct message, however you can get it to us.
Here's what I'll say to that. The best way to submit would be when we post the Instagram/Twitter announcement for this episode, write your anagram name in the comments of either on Twitter or Instagram. And that way we have them all in 2 places.
Perfect. So you have to submit Twitter or Instagram.
I should mention, maybe this is a fun fact. It goes back to the old Nabokov thing, right? How Vladimir Nabokov had Vivian Darkbloom show up.
That's correct. Correct.
In the occasional piece of his work as his little anagrammed alter ego. There we go.
Vivian Darkbloom. Oh, you can do it on Facebook too, because I'll put that there for this episode. Like 4 people will see it, but that's fine.
Vivian Darkbloom. That's going to be tough to beat. Danielle Ely, we had Leeds Liani was hers.
Leeds Liani.
And
that got a nice ring.
It also sounds like a detective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Leeds Liani. Going back to the karaoke thing, give us a rundown of who did what songs. What were the highlights?
Oh, God.
Matt Booker, what was your song?
Oh, well, I did not sing, unfortunately. I did not get a chance to. If I had to do it over again, I should have just wrote my name on the list first thing.
As Brett Chatham.
Brett Chatham.
Were you secretly, inwardly relieved that you didn't, or are you like an exhibitionist when you go to karaoke?
I'm an extrovert, so I'm sincerely sad that I didn't. As Matt will tell you, I did get to sing backup on a Violet Femme song.
Oh, okay.
That was great. That was fun.
That was great.
Little known fact about me is I've never sung public karaoke in a venue like that. I've been to karaoke lots. I've just never sung.
You should.
I think so. I think if I had to choose a song, it would be El Scorcho by Weezer. That would be my best bet at a top performance. Nice. Yeah.
That's pretty great. I mean, Mike Miley doing, I should say, I'm sorry, Chunky Brewster doing.
Chunky Brewster.
Doing the talking. I think it's just his alter ego.
He showed up.
It's an alter ego.
He showed
Chunky
up with that
Brewster
before anagrams ever entered the conversation.
He did Wild Wild Life by Talking Heads, which was freaking amazing.
Okay. Good. Jeff Severs.
I mean, Jeff Severs was also great.
Somebody really that great. I used to know.
Which was amazing. We should do like a Spotify playlist of all of these, Dave.
Oh, that's a fun idea.
As the karaoke list.
Danielle did a pretty stellar ironic.
That was great.
Oh, Alanis Morissette.
Yes.
That's apropos for a Wallace conference.
It was a crowd favorite too. A crowd favorite for sure.
Fantastic.
But no, the conference was great. I have one little offhand comment, which is the Vernon's panel, which I mentioned about Wallace in the classroom. This guy Daniel, I forget his last name, Shusett. I don't want to butcher it, but he said something about reading Infinite Jest, which he did in a class, and he showed like a screenshot of his Instagram post when he finished Infinite Jest, and he called it "My Dear Jestini." And just the night before, I had made an offhand joke about firing up the cable teenies, and literally no one got this joke. And so I would say if there are any listeners out there who get this joke, like, please contact me offline, because I just felt like it was serendipitous where he said, "My dear Justini," and I said, "Fire up the cable teenies." That I wrote that down. I was like, God dang it. I'm going to find my people if anyone knows what that means.
So can we talk about this, or you just have to know?
No, it's just a minor like offhand. Okay. Yeah, it's just a minor like offhand thing.
I'm not in this club. I'm sorry to say.
That's fine. It's probably an American only thing, but I had a really great time at the conference, and it was really great to see everyone who came. Again, there were more panels than I could possibly attend. Anything else you have, Matt, that's like kind of overarching or the underarching? I don't know.
Yeah, what's the conference low light? What's the anti-conference MVP, Matt?
Oh no, I can't go.
Blow it up.
Let's see. Okay, so I had a train delayed coming back from Champaign, Illinois to Jackson.
It's better than a train crash like last year.
That's true. That's true.
On the way there. Yeah.
So instead of getting on a train at 10:30 at night, I got on a train at 1:30 in the morning. But because there's about like 12 or 15 people sitting there, and there's nothing we can do about it. Like, just I'll just cut to the chase. A betting pool developed as to what time the train was actually going to arrive. I lost $1 because I'm a big but
could be worse.
And show me the airport terminal where that kind of thing happens when there's a delay.
That kind of camaraderie. Yeah.
Seinfeld, that happened with Kramer,
I mean, the Amtrak, it's good travel if you're not in a hurry.
Oh, yeah.
That's true. And your stories from that, like, you're kind of underselling this. Like, I feel like you should just tell us more about the story from this point.
About what?
The the Golden Girl type group that was there.
Oh yeah. Oh, they were running the betting pool, and
The betting pool.
and I think they were going all the way to New Orleans, and they are going to have more fun in New Orleans than we can
Than
imagine.
you had in Illinois, probably.
And it's possible, and you know, if I saw correctly what was happening, they were not wearing matching T-shirts, but they had got matching T-shirts for this trip made. Mm-hmm. And a couple of them decided that the ticket agent, we were all friends at that point, right? And so they asked him if he had a Sharpie and if he would sign their matching trip to New Orleans T-shirts.
Oh my God!
It was. I mean, this is what happens at the train station at midnight.
Yes, it is.
Oh my God!
Indeed.
I'm trying to think. So I have a few other people. I want to give a shout out to Brian Cooper, who I met at lunch with his wife, Christy.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I didn't get to meet him. We've had some really fun interaction online in emails.
Friend of the pod, and it was really great to hang out with him at lunch. I also met Tess Brewer, who was there, and Tess and I talked a little bit about heresy, which is super interesting. Heresy,
like religious heresy.
Yes.
Oh.
And
tell me more.
She
I love a good
I missed
heresy.
her paper. I missed her paper, so I can't really do it justice. But there were a lot of people who had papers that I just could not make. And overall, I want to encourage everyone who has never attended the conference to try to make it at some point in the future. I do want to give a shout out to Ryan Edel. I haven't said his name on the show yet, but Ryan deserves a lot of credit for making the conference happen the past couple of years. Who else? Tom Winchester. I mentioned Tom. I missed his paper. Good friend of mine, and I love Tom. I'm sorry I couldn't make his paper.
We're gonna call this the apology episode. That's how I'm gonna title it.
Well,
episode
that's
39, the apology episode.
As you know, you were hanging out there last year. You miss 2/3 of it by just going to 1/3 of it. You go to 1/3 of it, and it's you miss the other third. So I spend 2/3 of my time there being hey, sorry I missed your paper, but I am truly sorry I missed all these people's paper.
Do you think that this conference needs to go to a format where it's one panel in each time slot and just take way less papers, or is this a better, more livable format?
I like that. I'll tell you, I like that. I've been to conferences that are both ways.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with picking between two things, but picking between three is really hard.
Double binds are one thing. Triple binds are
very hard.
Yeah.
But it was great to see everyone.
Dennis was there. Talk to Dennis.
Dennis Frank, always there. Love
Frank.
Dennis.
Yeah, sorry, I missed
great to hang
Dennis.
out with him.
Yeah. We got to get Dennis.
Shout out to Dennis.
Get Dennis at karaoke next year.
Prolixian, I got to give a shout out to her. She was there. A lot of people were there. Like I say, I can't possibly do it full justice, but it was great to see you all, and I hope that we get people who come back next year. So
absolutely, myself included.
Dave Laird, I missed you. Rob Short, I missed you.
Corey Baldoff.
Charlie Harris, I missed you. Corey Baldoff, I missed you.
John Mango.
A lot of people I missed. John Mango. The list goes on. Chris Ayers.
Yeah, Chris Ayers is not there either.
With that, where can people find us, Dave?
We are at Concavity Show on Twitter and Instagram. You can email us, concavityshow@gmail.com. We're on Facebook at The Great Concavity.
Any final thoughts, Matt Luter, before we just go to the break?
I think my final thoughts would just be that I would agree with everything Matt said about if you have not made it to this conference before and you're thinking about it, it is a really welcoming conference. It is a really open and friendly and sociable group of folks who really are interested in just keeping the conversation going.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Matt Luter, for the third time, thank you for being on the show. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And as usual, thank you so much to Robin O'Neill for your art, and to the band Parquet Courts for letting us use your song Instant Disassembly off the album Sunbathing Animal. Go buy that. It's fantastic.
Actually, can we give like a double shout out to Robin O'Neill and just be like triple shout out to Robin O'Neill? If she hears this, be like, get well soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Robin had a recent surgery, I think, so we're wishing her all the best things for her recovery. And actually, Parquet Courts is going to be playing in Vancouver in September. If you're around, I have high plans to make that show.
For real?
So hopefully, yeah, for real. I'll be back in Canada in mid-August, and
Nice.
I'm going to see the band Big Thief that week in Vancouver.
Nice.
And Parquet Courts plays 4 days later, so I will very likely be there as well. So swing by, come see Andrew Savage and the boys. Hopefully play Instant Disassembly live. That's what I'm hoping for.
Tear it up. Until next time.
Thanks for filling me in on everything I missed, Matt Booker and Matt Luter. Much appreciated. See you guys for episode 40.